Hello guys, and today we're going to be talking about the Pokemon that I think should or have a chance of becoming the Fairy type in Generation 6, this is stuff like the Pokemon would be either added another type on, as their normal type, or exchanged a type. So I'm just going to get going. There's quite a lot of Pokemon I've chosen out here, so you have to go for it. Now Clefairy, Clefairy and Clefable, it's kind of a given really, they are known as the Fairy Pokemon, so you'd assume they would be either changed to Fairy type or Fairy type added onto normal type. And Igglybuff, Jigglypuff and Wigglytuff, we already know that Jigglypuff is going to be normal Fairy type, so I'm assuming the same thing may happen with Igglybuff and Wigglytuff as well. Next up we have Abracadabra and Alakazam. Now I've chosen these out because they look a bit fairy-like, they have the ears sort of, so it's a possibility they may become psychic Fairy types, so it's something that I might like to see. And likewise I've chosen out here Drowsy and Hypno, again because they're a bit fairy-like, not the little fairies you're used to see, but they have similarities. And I also picked out here Goldeen and Seaking because they sort of look like fairies. They have the kind of the design for it, so they could become water fairy types, which I think would be very nice. And here we have Mime Jr. and Mr. Mime. Again, I'm choosing it because they kind of look like fairy types. It could be nice to see again to be another psychic fairy type. So going by what I have, there's now 3 lots of those. So I'm assuming they will all be picked out. And here we have Happiny, Chansey and Blissey. Yes, another normal type trio. I think these have a very high chance of becoming fairy types just because of the way they look and kind of how they're associated with Pokemon. Now moving on to Generation 2, here we have Sentret and Furret. I think these again look a fair bit like fairies, especially Furret, so it's definitely got some potential there. And now on to Togepi, Togetic, Togekiss. Togepi definitely should gain a fairy type I think, but Togetic and Togekiss I think should lose their normal typing and become fairy flying types instead, because I think it kind of fits their design a lot better. Now we've already heard that Marill is going to become water fairy type, so I'm assuming the same thing is going to happen with Azumarill, and Azurill I assume will become normal fairy type, or just normal type and then evolve gaining 2 types, which is a bit strange really, but yeah. And here again we have Wynaut and Wobbuffet, again psychic type Pokemons, but I think again they have a fairly high chance of being fairies because they're kind of the ones you wouldn't expect and such like that. And now here we have Snubbull and Gramble, again they're known as the fairy Pokemon, so I would assume they're going to gain the fairy type or at least become fairy types or gain it on top of their normal typing. Now we've already heard that Gardevoir will become psychic fairy type, so the same thing may happen with Ralts and Curlier, but we are not sure yet, so I assume it would be, or at least you'd gain a fairy type upon evolving to a Gardevoir. Now Surskit and Masquerain, the theory behind this was because Masquerain will become a bug fairy type, because it does look a fair bit like a fairy type if you look closely. It does look like a fairy, the sort of thing you would assume. Now here I've picked out Whismur. Whismur does look like a fair bit like a fairy type, but then again its Final Evolution Exploud does not at all, and I wouldn't expect it to lose a type upon evolving, so it's a possibility, but I don't think it's going to happen really. Now I've chosen that Skitty and Delcatty as well, because they're little cat Pokemon, they could definitely become fairy types. Now here we have Mawile. I would definitely assume to see this being a steel fairy type just because of its kind of look, and steel fairy would be a good combination I think. I've also chosen out Plusle and Minun because I think they do look a lot like fairies, they're small, they're cute, etc, so they could both become electric fairy types. And I've also included here Volbeat and Illumise, another duo from home region, and I think these could well become bug fairy types just because of their pairing and their design and the kind of premise. I've also picked out Spoink and Grumpig here because they could well become psychic fairy types. Again, this is like the 4th or 5th psychic fairy type I've predicted, but they have possibility. I've also said about Spinder as well. Spinder could possibly become a fairy type or just a normal type fairy type because it kind of has the design and the feel for it, if you get what I'm saying. I've also here chosen Feebas and Milotic. Milotic because it's kind of, it's the beauty Pokemon, and fairies are usually associated with beauty, so you may see it turn into a water fairy type. I've also chosen out here Shuppet and Banette, ghost types, so they could become ghost fairy types, which would be an interesting combination, so I think that might be why they do it. They also do look, they're based on puppets, so fairies and puppets aren't too far apart. And here we have Luvdisc, because it is, it's a fairy Pokemon, it's a love Pokemon. Fairies could be associated with love there, so it's definitely a potential pairing there. And I've chosen now going on to Generation 4, Buneary and Lopunny, because again they have sort of the sense around them that they are kind of cute, they're fairy types. They could be fairy types, I mean they could either gain it or just become fairy types out the bat. I've also here chosen Glameow and Purugly, because again Glameow is quite a cute Pokemon and fairy type would work fairly well with it. Purugly however I'm not too sure, so it's a given there. And finally for just Sinnoh region we have Finneon and Lumineon, because they are, you know, again, the very design is very fairy-like, you know, very elegant and graceful. Now moving on to Generation 5, I've chosen Audino here. I think this has a very high chance of becoming a fairy type, just because it's kind of, it's in its design, it would either just become a fairy type or gain it on top of its normal type. I've also here chosen Minccino and Cinccino, because again they look like fairy types, and it would be interesting to see if they gain it there. And now I've chosen two psychic duos again, Gothita, Gothorita and Gothitelle, who again, I'm saying this so much, but they look like fairy types, they could be fairy types, we're not sure though. And here we have Solosis, Durojon and Ranunculus, again another psychic type lot, you know, they've included far too many here, but it's a possibility really, they do kind of look similar. And of course we already know, for Generation 6, Sylveon is going to be a fairy type, and also the new Pokemon revealed in Korokoro, Furabebe, is going to be a fairy type, so yeah, that'll be interesting to see them in the games. I hope you enjoyed this video guys, please leave your thoughts in the description about whether some of these you think could become fairy types, or some I've left out that you think might become some. I'd love to hear your input on this. And also don't forget to leave a like, and of course subscribe so you don't miss any more of the X and Y news going around at the moment. Goodbye guys.